and welcome to Scotland at 7 this evening with myself, Samantha Paton. And tonight I am joined by Maureen Watt. Hello, Maureen, how are you doing?
Hi, Sam. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I just realised I gave my Sunday name there, my normal name of Sam, but never mind. Let's get on and we'll get through the news and we'll have a chat as we go along. Now, first of all, we're going to do a Middle East update. At least 55,637 Palestinians have been killed, and 129,880 have been injured in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, according to the Gaza Health Authority. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency said 33 people were killed by Israeli fire in the Palestinian territory today, including 11 who were seeking aid. People in Gaza are concerned that the latest escalations in the Israeli-Gaza war will be overlooked as the focus has now moved to the Israeli conflict with Iran. Israeli troops raided two Palestinian refugee camps in the occupied West Bank overnight, and the military told Agence French Press, otherwise known as AFP, as Israel carries out attacks on multiple fronts. The deaths include the latest in near-daily killings of Palestinians seeking aid in 3 weeks since Israel partially lifted a total blockade on Gaza that it had imposed for almost 3 months. Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei,
Turn
vowed on
someone's
Wednesday that his
volume up.
country would show no mercy towards Israel's rulers. Iran will respond to Israeli strikes strongly and without restraint, its ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva said on Wednesday. Donald Trump is reportedly considering entering the Israel-Iran conflict and joining Israel's strikes on Iran. Only the Americans have a bomb capable of destroying the Fordo nuclear facility, which is located deep underground and could be one potential target for the US. In the past 3 days, at least 30 US military tanker aircraft, which are used to refuel fighter jets, and bombers have been flown to Europe, according to media reports. The US has also ordered a second carrier group, the USS Nimitz, to the Middle East, part of their preparations, experts say, would be necessary for the strikes. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, warned on Wednesday that direct US military assistance to Israel could radically destabilise the situation in the Middle East. Ryabkov has quoted by the Interfax news agency as saying that Russia cautions the US against supplying such assistance to Israel or even considering it. He said Moscow was in contact with both Israel and Iran, leaders of the Russian and United Arab Emirates on Wednesday warned of extreme negative consequences from ongoing Israel-Iran conflict, as President Vladimir Putin pushed himself as a possible mediator. In a phone call with the UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, Putin confirmed Russia's readiness to provide mediation assistance to promote dialogue between the parties to the conflict, the Kremlin has said in a statement. The Supreme Leader of Iran has rejected the US calls for surrender, warned that joining the war would lead to irreparable damage as Israel ramped up rhetoric about regime change and ordered civilians to evacuate the district in Iran. President Donald Trump has declined to answer reporters' questions on whether the US is planning to strike Iran or its nuclear facilities. He said the Iranians had reached out but felt it was very late to be talking. There is a big difference between now and a week ago. Nobody knows what I am going to do. Now, Maureen, this is just actually quite worrying. I don't know how you feel about this, but the kind of feeling when you're out and about talking to people, people are worried about this because they're not sure of what America's going to do, never mind the UK. How are you feeling about this? Are you anxious as well that this could go the wrong way?
Yes, when you think that is the US is obviously backing Israel, both in Gaza and now in Iran, and the extent to which they will back in Israel, is very worrying. Against Iran is really extremely worrying. Um, I don't think Donald Trump knows himself what he's going to do yet. I hear that there are splits in the Trump administration as to what they should do. And I suppose, we know with Donald Trump, it's who he speaks to last is his position. But the big worry is that Russia has obviously always, has been an ally of Iran, and whether Russia will see it, if there's an attack by the US on Iran, whether Russia will see it as an attack on them and one of their allies. That to me is really worrying. Um, clearly the Middle East is becoming a powder keg, and right now I feel just as I do for the Gazans, the Iranians, because many of them want regime change away from the Ayatollahs. They've tried it several times but have been unsuccessful. So they do want regime change, but when they see a might like the US backing Israel to bombard them, then their nationalism grows, regardless of who runs the regime. So I feel very sorry for them. There are millions of people who live in Tehran, and it's not possible for all of them to flee. And it must be hell on earth there as well as in Gaza. How a country like Israel can fight on two fronts without the help of the US is not believable, I don't think. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with you, Maureen. It's right now it's terrifying what we're witnessing, and yeah, it's going to be scary days ahead. And hopefully, common sense will prevail and hold all this back. That's all we can wish for. Now on to the next news for the Ukraine update, day 1211. North Korea will send a division of builders and two military brigades, 5,000 people, as well as 1,000 demeaning personnel to the Kursk region, according to the Russian news agencies, quoting Putin's security chief, Sergei Shoigu, who was visiting Pyongyang in the North Korean capital. Of the 10,000 North Korean soldiers already sent to fight against Ukraine, there have been 6,000 casualties, according to reports. On Tuesday, Emmanuel Macron accused Russian president of exploiting the preoccupied international climate to carry out a deadly attack on Kyiv. It shows the complete cynicism of President Putin, who is using international context to step again attacks against civilians. The French president told reporters that the G7 summit in Canada. The G6 leaders, who remained to complete the summit in Canada after Trump left early, discussed Russia's war in Ukraine, international cooperation on key non-military issues. President Zelensky said, "We are ready for peace negotiations, unconditional ceasefire. I think it's very important, but for this we need pressure on Russia." Trump's stance on Ukraine puts him fundamentally at odds with the other G7 leaders, who are clear that Russia is the aggressor in the war. The US has declined to join new sanctions against Russia from other countries, with Trump saying, "When I sanction a country, that costs the US a lot of money, a lot of money." Russia's attack on Kyiv was flattened Russia's attack on Kyiv flattened a section of an apartment block as a barrage of hundreds of drones, dozens of missiles killed at least 18 people and wounded 155 across Ukraine. And officials declared a day of mourning on Wednesday. Authorities said 16 were killed in Kyiv and 2 in Odessa. A missile struck a 9-storey residential building in Kyiv's Slomonsky district. Australia has joined allies in imposing penalties on the Russian Shadow Fleet, used to evade sanctions, trade in goods that help support Moscow's war in Ukraine. They are first such measures by Australia operating under the deceptive practices including flag hopping, disabling tracking systems and operating with inadequate insurance. The Shadow Fleet enables the illicit trade of Russian oil and other sanctioned goods, said Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister in Canberra. Now, Maureen, this is another ongoing war where America, i.e. Trump, could be using his influence and choosing not to. And in sort of way, do you think he's fanning the flames of war when it comes to Ukraine and Russia? And he seems to be talking, well, what we've seen there was him talking about money is more important. So as long as they're making money, he's not interested in the war coming to an end. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just when you were giving that report there, Sam, I was thinking about, he says that sanctions cost the US money. What about the tariffs? How much does that cost the US? But I mean, you hear Trump say that he had a long conversation with Putin. He's also spoken to Xi Jinping in the last few weeks. And I think he sees himself, honestly, as a dictator just like them. He seems to think that they're more of his friends. I mean, you saw how he was just so dismissive of Emmanuel Macron yesterday. So he is so volatile that we really don't know what he's going to do. And I don't think the people around him know what he's going to do. It must be hell on earth working for him. So it's clearly not on his radar at the moment. He obviously seems to be able to only deal with one thing at a time. And at the moment, it's obviously Iran. So I was just thinking that the other day that the Ukraine war just seems to be something that will go on and on and on. Just a war of attrition. It will, of course, be interesting if the US goes into with Israel into the conflict with Iran, and then Russia does. How the Russians will divide out their army and their military in terms of between Iran and Ukraine. So the whole area is very volatile, including up through Turkey to Ukraine.
Yeah, certainly, Maureen. I think at the moment with American politics, it's very volatile at the moment because people don't know where they're coming or going, especially with Trump, because he keeps saying one thing, and then if you look at his social media, he's contradicting himself as well, which is quite dangerous for a leader. Right, now to move on to the next story of this evening. The UK bill to cut social security and disability payments. The UK government has published a new welfare reform bill this week at Westminster, detailing plans to cut disability benefits. A Commons vote is expected within weeks on the proposals. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner has defended the measures during Prime Minister's questions, standing in for Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and planned changes to the Personal Independent Payments, also known as PIP. The carers allowance are intended to save £4.8 billion. Eligibility criteria will be tightened, meaning some people will be limited ability to cook meals or wash themselves may no longer qualify unless they have other health conditions. The UK analysis indicates the reforms could see around 1.2 million people with disabilities lose thousands of pounds annually. It also estimates that 250,000 people, more people, including 50,000 children, could fall into poverty if the plans are approved. Their proposals have sparked strong opposition from within the Labour Party, with reports suggesting up to 170 Labour MPs may vote against the bill. Angela Rayner did not rule out disciplinary action against those who oppose the legislation, prompting further internal tensions. The SNP has criticised the proposals and questioned whether the Labour MPs will be punished for voting against the cuts. SNP Deputy Westminster Leader Pete Wishart raised the issue in Parliament, highlighting the potential impact on disabled people and families struggling with the cost of living. In Scotland, Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville confirmed the Scottish Government will not apply the same changes to its adult disability payment. She urged the UK Government to abandon plans, warning they could undermine efforts to reduce child poverty, particularly as half of all children in poverty in Scotland live in households with disabled person. Scottish Government has called for an approach that processes social security and confirmed it will not cut devolved disability support in line with the UK Government's bill. Maureen, just as I was reading this here, I was just thinking about your words about Trump wanting to be a dictator. And it's, you can feel free to correct me if you think I'm out of line here, but it seems as if the current Westminster administration are acting a bit like dictators, threatening to discipline their own MPs on voting. Now, the last time I looked with democracy, we've all got a right to vote for where we see fit. And regarding the disability, people to be putting in these sanctions and changing the legitimacy and the eligibility of disability, it's one size fits all when it doesn't, when it comes to people's abilities. And they're forgetting, and the one thing it keeps not getting reported on mainstream media is a lot of people who are disabled still work. This is to help them with the extra costs of dealing with living with a disability. So the question to you, Maureen, is what's your thoughts on this? And yeah, go on, tell me your thoughts on this one.
So, I mean, the Labour government have been trailing this for a while, and while
Yeah,
Angela Rayner made an announcement today, as always, the devil will be in the detail. I mean, what criteria are they going to change for example, carers allowance, and uh, how they will reduce the payments? Um, but once again, like we saw with the winter fuel payments and their inability to remove the two-child cap, it is the most vulnerable in UK society today that are again being hammered. Now, they're always wanting to cut, but they're never willing to increase taxes on those that can well afford them. And we've got to keep reminding ourselves that the gap between the rich and the poor in this country is one of the greatest in the world. And, it continues to grow. The richest 5-10% continue to get ever more wealthy, while the lowest income people in our society continue to get hammered. And that's not the kind of society I want to live in. And I'm sure there are thousands and thousands of Scots who don't want to live in that kind of society either, which is why in the SNP we must continue to be pushing that there is another way through independence. And we wouldn't run our society like that. We would be more in the Norwegian model, where people are taxed, but they get the benefits and the help that they require. So, as I say, the devil will be in the detail here. And I hope, against hope, I think, that in working out the detail, when civil servants are working out the detail of this, that they consult widely with carers organisations, of which there are many, and disability organisations, to see exactly how this is going to affect, as you say, Sam, the most vulnerable in our society.
And to be putting washing and cooking, which is basic human needs to keep us fit and healthy, to be putting them into the criteria that that might be removed unless they've got other disabilities and conditions is demoralising and inhumane, really. You know, what's your thoughts on that? Because then a lot of people live on their own, so they don't have people to come in and help them with washing and cooking. And a lot of these services have now been privatised, where you've got to pay for like, Meals on Wheels, which used to be provided by our local authorities. You know, these things are a lot of these things are now privatised. So it's like if you want, it's like they're trying to privatise disability effectively to a certain degree.
Yeah, you're probably right there. I mean, I always worry about who is doing the assessing of these things. Often it's left up to, okay, they've got criteria, but in the end of the day, it's left up to individuals to work it out. And, I've known recently with helping people that, um, there are people who do not know how to cook and just go out for one hot meal a day, in the cheapest cafe, and just snack for the rest of the day. And obviously, that's not healthy, and it's going to be life limiting in the end of the day. Um, but people who do want to help themselves, and most people do, I don't think often that the Labour government comes from that point of view, actually, that, they have
No, they
this
don't.
idea like the Tories do that everybody's a scrounger until proved otherwise. I, that's not the kind of caring, compassionate society that I would like to see. And um, yes, the UK government's in a mess, but seriously, this is the best they can come up with in terms of saving money. I mean, I don't know if we're going on to speak about winter fuel payments. If people just got a decent pension, why would they need a winter fuel payment? And all these civil servants that are there working out who's going to get a winter fuel payment or not. I mean, this is just basic common sense.
It is, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to do a wee rejig here of our running order, and I'm going to jump to the. Oh, I'm getting told I'm not allowed. It was just because Maureen had just
Yeah,
mentioned the
yeah,
winter payments, but we'll
yeah,
get back to that
yeah,
conversation, Maureen. Right
yeah.
now, the UK inflation at 3.4%. The UK inflation fell slightly to 3.4% in May, according to the Office for National Statistics, as falling petrol and air fares were offset by rising food and household goods. The Consumer Prices Index dropped from 3.5% in April. However, food inflation increased sharply to 4.4%, up from 3.4% the previous month. This was driven by higher prices for sugar, jam, and chocolate, with cocoa costs rising due to poor harvests in West Africa. Prices for furniture and household items also rose, while clothing and footwear prices fell slightly over the year. The Bank of England is expected to keep interest rates at 4.25% when it meets this week, despite calls to lower borrowing costs as the UK economy slows. Wages growth has eased, unemployment has risen, and the economy contracted in April. The SNP's Dave Duggan MP has highlighted concerns over the cost of living, particularly for households affected by rising food and energy prices. Figures show food prices have now increased for 3 consecutive months, with the current rate of the highest since February 2023. Meanwhile, energy bills are forecast to rise 3 times over the next year. Estimated from energy firms suggest the price cap will go up by around 2 to 3% in October. followed by smaller increases in early 2026. Since the current UK government took office, bills have risen by £281 on average, despite a pledge to cut them by £300. Even with a temporary 7% fall in July, costs are expected to remain £152 higher than last year. Business groups, including the CBI, have revised down their economic growth forecasts. Organisation has warned that increased costs, including national insurance changes, are dampening investment, weakening recruitment, and slowing the wider recovery. The main inflation rate remains above the Bank of England's 2% target, continuing to put pressure on households and businesses alike. Now, Maureen, this again, I mean, it's been spun as a good news story, that's fell slightly to 3.4%. But in actual fact, the cost of food is rising and it's rising in real time. We just need to walk into a local shop and we can see the price of basic supplies, whether it's bread, milk, butter, fruit, vegetables, are rising. Um, I I really don't know how, or the answer to, well, we know the answer. It's all about not taxing the rich, and the people, the rest of us are kind of left to cover the costs. But how much more before families are already struggling. I mean, how much more can the normal everyday family keep this going for? Because we're already seeing more families going into poverty and families really struggling. So when do we turn around and say enough's enough?
I mean, there's the wider implications as well. People just feel that their noses to the grindstone all the time. They can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. They're just existing rather than living. And that, what I don't get is that the Labour government don't see that this is leading to people going to reform, because reform don't give us any of their policies or anything, but they're just different and they're not one of the ones that have been round and about for ages. So the fact that they don't see that really worries me. They, I mean, I don't know if they don't shop either, or they just, they've got enough money so they get it delivered, or and they don't actually see the prices. But you're right. You go to the shops and you think, my goodness, even in the summer, for fruit and veg used to be, I think, as far as I can recall, cheaper in the summer, but it doesn't seem to be happening. And um, as I say, as you said, well, sugar and jam, well, we can do without that, but chocolate, like a bit now and again. Um, so
I agree with you there. We can't
wonder,
do without chocolate.
you wonder why sugar and jam prices are going up. As you say, bad harvest. But we've got to get used to the fact that there will be bad harvests and affecting different products in different parts of the world because of climate change. And I still can't get my head round about how energy prices work and price caps work. But if there's conflict in Iran, then in the Middle East, an oil producer, gas producer, then will be affected by higher prices there. So I can't see a fall in inflation anytime soon, and that's of course why the Bank of England will keep the rates high. If we saw the Bank of England bringing down interest rates, there might be some relief on mortgage for folk. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's a grind.
yeah, it is, isn't it? Right, now to move on to the next story. The one that you were wanting, Maureen. Scott Government announces the proposals to protect the pension age winter heating payments. More than 720,000 pensioners in Scotland will receive a pension age winter heating payment this winter after the Scottish Government confirmed new proposals to protect support following the UK Government changes. Households in Scotland with pensions on an income below 35,000 will either receive £203.40 or £305.10, depending on the age of the oldest resident. The lower amount will be provided to households where no one is aged 80 or over, while the higher amount will go to those where at least one person is aged 80 or above. The change follows a recent U-turn by the UK Government to restore winter fuel payments, enabling the Scottish Government to revise its plans in response. Previous amendment and regulations lodged at Holyrood will now be withdrawn, and with new regulations to be brought forward instead. The Scottish Government has stated that these revised payments will align with the amounts now confirmed for England and Wales, but with an additional step to ensure targeted support. Talks are underway between the Scottish and UK governments to recover payments from those earning more than £35,000 annually. This would be done through a tax system automatically with no need for pensioners to register or take further action. The aim of the proposal is to maintain higher levels of winter heating support for the lower income pensioners, while ensuring that those on higher incomes contribute proportionately. The scheme is expected to be in place for the winter ahead and will be administered through the existing systems in cooperation with HMRC. The announcement forms part of the Scottish Government's wider approach to protecting older people from energy costs, particularly during colder months, amid ongoing concerns about household affordability and inflationary pressures. Maureen, I'm just going to hand this over to you because I know you were wanting to talk about this, so have the floor.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things where, given the pressure by opposition MPs and the wider public, and the results of local council by-elections and the rise of reform, the UK government has been forced into a dramatic U-turn. Now, just think of all the number of civil servants who've been involved in making this U-turn down south and having to rejig the payments in the Scottish government when they could have been turning their attention and their work to something else. I mean, I'm glad that the Scottish government is not having to meet the whole cost of the winter fuel payment that they said they were going to do. The Scottish government is hampered in doing things it wants to do because it feels it has to mitigate the worst excesses of the assault on people's livelihoods by the Westminster government. And I don't think that's what devolution was meant to do. So I hope the UK government makes sure that the Scottish government gets the money in this area that's entitled to. In a way, I would like to have seen Scottish pensioners get more because it's colder in the north and we've got old, drafty stone houses in many places. But I suppose it's too much to kind of target it in better areas. I wonder whether we're supposed to put the 310 pence or whatever it is into our tax returns, or whether they'll put it in, and whether it might be double counted.
Well,
That was
yeah,
one of the
that's the
things
thing. That's the
that struck
thing.
me.
Oh, yeah, that it would mean it would need to be. Yeah, I guess that's one of the kind of small print we'll need to look at and see what happens with that. But yeah, I mean, you think of the waste of the money it's taken to remove it, to then add it, all the admin money that's taken. That money could have been put to better use, really, and put more towards pensioners and those that need it.
Yeah.
So now we're going on to the next story. Scottish Government have published a plan to secure just transition for Grangemouth. The Scottish Government has published a new industrial transition plan for Grangemouth, outlining 21 actions aimed at attracting green investment, creating jobs, supporting the local workforce during the shift to net zero. Grangemouth Industrial Just Transition Plan, developed in collaboration with the Grangemouth Future Industry Board, is the first regional just transition plan in Scotland. It brings together industry leaders, local community representatives, Falkirk Council and both Scottish and UK governments. The plan is designed to guide the area through the long-term move away from fossil fuel refining and toward sustainability, energy and manufacturing. The key measures include the delivery of a £25 million Just Transition Fund to support current businesses and attract new investment. The plan also outlines a new industry-led strategy for scaling up decarbonisation projects and creating a clear pathway for commercial investment. An industrial skills programme is also being introduced to help existing and future workers develop the expertise needed for emerging sectors. A new Grangemouth regulatory hub will be created to help the industry operate more sustainable and efficiently. The plan will also be supported by existing projects, including the Falkirk and Grangemouth Growth Deal, and targeted support for workers affected by the planned closure of the refinery. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is well off. Forth Valley College, located near the industrial cluster, is playing a central role in supporting this transition. The college is developing a £4 million skills transition centre focused on retraining workers from high carbon sectors and preparing the workforce for future roles in cleaner industries such as sustainable aviation fuel and green chemicals. While the Scottish Government has led the plan's development, it has called on the UK Government to update policies needed to support the commercial rollout of low carbon technologies in Scotland. So quickly, Maureen, a quick response regarding what's happening with Grangemouth.
Well, this is the result of a lot of work by multiple agencies. I think it was called Project Willow. And I don't know if this is final report or an interim report, but it does set out all the work that has been undertaken to, I mean, I think it was in the pipeline, but because Petronas came and said that they were going to close the Grangemouth plant early, it's had an added urgency. It's all good, but the biggest thing is attracting new industries and investment into the area. And I don't think it's going to be confined just to renewable energy sectors. I mean, there are lots of kind of spin-offs as well. I heard somebody say they managed to attract a company that wanted to go in here. And interestingly, didn't get much coverage, but I can't remember, it was this morning or yesterday morning, that Scotland is still, after London and maybe the Southeast, the most attractive place for inward investment. So we've got to make sure that Grangemouth is a focus of this, especially if it's in the just transition area. I think there's a lot to be done on sustainable aviation fuel. I don't know much about the grey chemicals. You mentioned it. I'll have to swat up on that.
Well, there you go. You've got homework for this evening then, Maureen.
Yes,
Now to
miss.
move
Yes,
on.
miss.
Now to move on to our next story. The UK gas companies will be in line for windfall payments this winter. UK gas power stations could again receive significant windfall payments this winter as energy operators prepare for peak demand periods when renewable generation may fall short. The National Energy System Operator expects the UK's electricity supply this winter to be the most secure in 5 years. This is partially due to the greater number of gas-fired power plants being available to generate electricity during periods when wind and solar power are unable to meet demand. Gas generators are typically used for during cold, still winter days when electricity demand is high and renewable output is low. In these conditions, some gas plants can command very high prices to start generating power at short notice. In January this year, two gas plants, one in Hertfordshire and another in Flintshire, were paid nearly £18 million in just 3 hours to help meet peak demand. The scale of such payments has raised concerns across the energy sector. Some industry observers have pointed to perverse incentive built into the current pricing system. where the cost of electricity from renewables is still linked to the higher market rates set by gas-fired generation. This means that even low-cost wind energy can result in higher prices for consumers when gas plants are called upon to cover shortfalls. Although the number of gas plants is ready to generate has increased, this does not automatically mean a greater reliance on fossil fuels or similar record-breaking payments will be repeated. Each day, the National Energy System Operator selects which mix of energy sources, renewable gas, batteries will be used to maintain a stable balance between supply and demand. Now, Maureen, reading that there, and I'm just going through it, and I'm just thinking that's daylight robbery. I mean, that there should be some sort of legislation in place when we do need to kind of use gas plants that they can't demand £18 million in just 3 hours. That is just, that's
It's,
diabolical and it makes no sense whatsoever.
yeah, it's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, I hope those figures are right. It just does seem unbelievable. I mean, we've talked on Broadcasting Scotland before about how energy prices are tagged to gas prices. And I think that's just so last century when all these renewable sources are coming on stream. I mean, what I've written down here is storage, 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 because battery storage
Yeah.
is so important to the electricity that we are producing, and sometimes having to pay wind generation owners to stop because we haven't got storage and it can't be brought into the grid. So along with all this, upgrading the grid is so important, and also, as I say, battery storage so that renewable sources of energy can outcompete gas prices because we have to reduce our reliance on gas because of the greenhouse gas emissions from them.
Yes, certainly, definitely, Maureen. Now, moving on to our next story. ScotGov announces consultation on increasing Scotland's offshore wind ambition. Scotland's Climate and Energy Secretary has launched a public consultation on proposals to increase offshore wind capacity to 40 gigawatts by 2040, announced on Tuesday at the Global Offshore Wind Forum in London. The Scottish Government is seeking views on raising its current offshore wind target from up to 11 gigawatts by 2030 to as much as 40 gigawatts by 2040. If delivered, this capacity would generate the equivalent electricity needs of around 45 million homes annually, based on current load factors and the average household consumption in Scotland. Officials say that the proposed increase is designed to reflect both the level of private sector interest and the scale of opportunity presented by recent seabed leasing rounds. ScotWind, Intog, Innovation and Targeted Oil and Gas. These rounds have attracted significant investment and demonstrated Scotland's potential as a global leader in offshore wind development. The consultation will also feed into the updated sectoral marine plan for offshore wind energy, which is currently under review. That plan will guide the sustainable expansion of offshore wind, ensuring that economic growth is balanced with environmental considerations. The Scottish Government has positioned renewable energy as a key driver of its transition to net zero and broader economic strategy. The ministers say the ambition to expand offshore wind aligns with climate targets while helping to secure long-term investment and employment across the Scottish regions. The consultation runs until the 13th of August. It is open to stakeholders from industry, communities and environmental groups who are encouraged to contribute to the shaping of Scotland's future energy mix. The finalised roadmap is expected to underpin future leasing and development decisions in Scottish waters. Scotland remains the only UK nation to link its renewable strategy directly to a just transition framework, aiming to shift from fossil fuels while supporting jobs, communities, and inclusive of economic growth. Growth, sorry, Maureen. Maureen, what's your thoughts on this? I mean, obviously, the Scottish Government is working towards net zero, where you're seeing across the world a lot of governments are kind of starting to pull away from net zero. Um, so I imagine you're going to be quite happy about this. What's your feelings on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think electricity is going to be the source of energy in the future. There's no doubt about that. We always talk about the number of households that new offshore wind farms will generate power for. But we need to be spending more time, I think, talking about how many industries can switch from oil and gas or to renewable energy. We talk about, for example, arc furnaces being the way forward for the steel industry. So I think the amount of electricity that we're going to need in the future is almost unquantifiable and um, you know just so huge that we're always going to be playing catch up in terms of generating wind energy. And of course, many countries are doing this, and there's still some naysayers about wind energy, especially offshore. We don't have so many onshore ones being built now. But it is the way in the future, and all these interconnectors from the offshore wind fields have to be in place too. Um, my worry is that I still don't think that we are producing enough of the raw materials and the equipment for these offshore wind farms ourselves. We could be doing it ourselves. I think a lot of it comes from Denmark and the Vestas company still. So I hope more of the production of the blades and the turbines themselves uh, comes to Scotland too.
I agree with you there, Maureen. It would make a bit of common sense if we could train up people to manufacture the turbines, and then that way, we're creating that industry ourselves, and yeah, and creating jobs and stuff as well. It'd be a good way, but never know. It might come to that. It might come to that as time grows. Now for the next story. New York Mayor candidate Brad Lander has says Trump is overseeing a fascist regime. The New York mayoral candidate and city comptroller Brad Lander was arrested on Tuesday by federal agents at an immigration court in Manhattan while accompanying an individual facing deportation proceedings. Lander has been attending hearings at the 26th Federal Plaza, where he was present to observe and support individuals involved in immigration cases. According to his account and video footage, the arrest occurred as he walked alongside an individual whose case had been dismissed earlier that day. He was seen questioning officers about the legal basis for their actions and requesting a judicial warrant before being restrained and handcuffed by masked agents. The US Department of Homeland Security stated that Lander was arrested for assaulting law enforcement and impeding a federal officer. Lander denies these allegations, claiming he did not assault anyone and was acting within the law. He has made multiple visits to the immigration court over the past month. Tuesday's incident has drawn comparisons to the other arrests involving high-profile politicians critical of President Trump. These include Democratic Senator Alex Padilla, who was handcuffed at a press conference in Los Angeles while confronting Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. about immigration enforcement. Both arrests have prompted criticism from the political spectrum. Demonstrators gathered outside the courthouse shortly after Lander's detention, chanting for his release. His wife addressed the media, calling the arrest unacceptable. Andrew Cuomo, a fellow mayoral candidate and former New York governor, described the situation as an example of excessive federal enforcement under policies linked to the Trump era immigration practices. The arrests are seen by critics as part of the wider pattern in which political figures opposing Trump or his immigration stance are being detained under disputed circumstances. The incidents have raised concerns about the use of federal authority and its implications for freedom of expression and political accountability. Now, Maureen, this goes back to what we were talking about away at the beginning of the programme about Donald Trump. Basically, he seems to be seeing himself as a dictator, and nobody is allowed to question him. Nobody's allowed to question his policies, and and it's just it's unbelievable to be seeing in what's meant to be a democratic country right now. It's actually terrifying. I already kind of gathered what your thoughts will be, but please tell us once again what your thoughts are regarding what's happening right now. And this is political opponents and basically elected representatives as well. This is happening to.
I go back to the Los Angeles riots and the way that Donald Trump sent in federal agencies there to round up so-called illegals, when a lot of them were people who had a definite right and the paperwork to stay in Los Angeles and the US, and were contributing hugely to society. And demonstrators were shouting at the law enforcement people, you're ones of us. You're the same as us. In other words, is this really what you want to be doing? And I think that, coupled with the huge number, which hasn't been reported a lot, huge number of No King riots, demonstrations that were happening all over the US. I mean, I think the opposition to Trump is beginning to get mobilized and showing some gumption against Trump. But, I think given the type of man he is, that'll probably make him even more determined to show his might. But at least we are seeing some opposition at last to Trump in the US. I just hope, given that this is New York, and arresting a legitimate person in New York means that New York might be the next place, because New York, coupled with California, are very heavily Democratic states, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They certainly are. But it'll be interesting to see as the people are kind of gathering strength in opposition to Trump, what's going to happen. But I fear, as you says, that would make him more determined, the type of character he is. Now, moving on to the next story. The Scottish Government publishes an independent expert group final report on minimum income guarantee. The Social Justice Secretary, Shirley-Anne Somerville, has welcomed a new report from Scotland's independent expert group on a minimum income guarantee published in Edinburgh this week to support a long-term efforts to reduce poverty. The report highlights a range of future options to support households and improve financial security, particularly for low-income families. It outlines how a minimum income guarantee could be used to strengthen Scotland's existing policies, many of which have been introduced to mitigate the impact of the UK government decisions. Scotland remains the only UK nation currently on course to meet child poverty reduction targets. This has been attributed in part to measures introduced by the Scottish Government including the Scottish Child Payment. The payment is forecast to support around 330,000 children in 2025 and has increased from £10 a week when it launched in 2021 to £27.15 by April 2025. Further action includes a commitment to remove the two-child limit for universal credit, which is expected to benefit approximately 43,000 children in 2026 to 2027. The Scottish Government has also implemented policies to raise standards in the workplace by applying Fair Work First criteria to public sector funding. As a result, proportionally 5 times as many employers in Scotland pay the real living wage compared to elsewhere in the UK. Additional cost of living support continues through free prescriptions, eye exams, and bus travel for 2.3 million people, along with free university tuition, childcare support worth over £6,000 per eligible child. The Scottish Government has confirmed there will be no plans to raise taxes to fund the minimum income guarantee, but will continue exploring future tax reform. Its medium-term financial strategy, due later this month, will set out the next steps alongside preparations for the next child poverty delivery plan, covering 2026 to 2031. Um, Maureen, I still, to this day, I can't get around my head that we're still talking about child poverty on a daily basis, and our government is having to step in to try and mitigate child poverty. When in this day and age we should be living in a way that shouldn't have to, the Scottish Government shouldn't have to mitigate if the taxing system was being correctly enforced. This is a good news story from the Scottish Government, but it also shows where the UK government is failing, really, on the most vulnerable in our society.
Yeah, I remember speaking to a Bank of England representative at an SNP conference a few years ago, and I said something like that, businesses, when they go to banks with their business plan, should be made to have in it employees all on a real living wage and making sure that their premises were as green as possible. And I said, why can't we do that? And he said, it just needs a tweaking of a finance bill and it could be made law just like that. So
Wow.
clearly, it's not something, well, that was in his view. Perhaps there'll be naysayers, but, um, you know, these things are possible when the will's there from governments. And it was good, Sam, that you went through all the things that the Scottish Government does with people's taxes to make sure that they are distributed as far as possible to help people with their living costs. And I think people need reminded that this is not happening in other parts of the UK.
Yeah.
And other parties are not as committed to these as the SNP. Now, to come to minimum basic income, the idea is great, but it's it's going to be tinkering at the edges as long as the Scottish Government is not in charge of all economic and financial levers. So it requires, if we wanted it to come to fruition, then the best way would be independence for Scotland, where you could start again on the hugely complicated income tax system that we have and ensure that everybody had a level of income, and then whatever you earn above that, is taxed according as it is now. It would be so much simpler. It would uh, mean that you didn't need to employ so many accountants and financial consultants and civil servants to work this all out. And it would be great to have a clean slate and be able to do that in an independent Scotland.
Yeah, it certainly would be, Maureen, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that'll be coming soon. Now for the final story of the evening, and I actually quite like this one. This is one of my favourite stories. It's 10 years since voting at 16 years old was introduced in Scotland. Today marks 10 years since the Scottish Parliament voted to extend voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland, a move that has enabled hundreds of thousands of young people to participate in elections. Since the law changed in 2014, younger voters have taken part in Scottish Parliament and local authority elections. According to the Electoral Commission, an estimated 123,000 more 16 and 17-year-olds will become eligible to vote in time for the next Scottish Parliament. The voting age was first lowered in Scotland ahead of the 2014 independence referendum, and the change was later made permanent for the Scottish Parliament and Council elections. The Scottish Government introduced the legislation with cross-party support and implemented the policy following the referendum. The SNP, which led the push for the extension, has marked the 10th anniversary by renewing calls for the UK Government to introduce the same voting rights in Westminster and the UK-wide elections. At present, 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland can only vote in Scottish and local elections, but they cannot vote in UK general elections or referendums. Scottish ministers argue that giving young people a say in a democratic process reflects their responsibilities in other areas of life. Investment in civic engagement and the aim of fostering greater participation and interests in politics from a younger age. Despite ongoing calls for change, the UK government continues to oppose lowering the age across the UK. The issue remains of several key constitutional differences between Scotland's devolved powers and the UK-wide legislation. Now, Maureen, I love this. I love the fact that 16, 17-year-olds were given the right to vote because at the end of the day, if they are earning, they start paying towards the system. So, as far as I'm concerned, they have a right. And in some cases, they are basically classified as adults. Um, One of the things I've noticed from my kids, with being a parent, my kids are much more politically aware than what I was as a teenager. I mean, I was a teenager and politics just went right over my head, but they are so politically aware. Do you think that's the problem with the UK government? That with today's age of technology, internet, social media, the younger generation are so aware of what's going on in the world and they can't spin the way that they can get away with the older generations. Do you think that's what's wrong with the UK government? Why they won't give 16, 17-year-olds the vote?
I think they're just fossilised in a bygone era, and change is not something that comes easily to the Westminster government. I think it shows that Scotland is far ahead in terms of being an open, socially just, democratic society. I mean, my reason for voting for this was that kids are learning about politics at school. And I thought if there was a gap between leaving school and then being allowed to vote, they wouldn't get into a habit of voting. So it was important that when they were still at school, they were voting, and they knew why they were voting, not how to vote, but why they were voting, and learning about democracy and all that sort of thing, and getting into the habit of voting while they were still at school. And there's not this gap when they were away doing other things and living as teenagers do and forget about voting. So that was my rationale for voting for this, and I can't see any reason why it shouldn't be and it shouldn't continue. I think it's been a positive for Scottish society.
Oh, definitely. Well, thank you, Maureen, for voting in that because from what I can see from the youngsters, it gives them a sense of responsibility and ownership for their communities. And it's a good thing. That is really a good thing. It gives them a voice. So, well, that's it for this evening at Scotland at 7. Thank you, Maureen. It's been a pleasure as always. But just before I go, I'm just going to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on your generosity. To everyone who has donated and everyone who has signed up to our monthly subscription, thank you so much. It is really appreciated. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. So far, we have raised almost £11,000 this year. So far, £13,000 less than what we need to be on target to pay the bills every month. And we urgently need to raise as much of that as possible, and that's immediately. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford the £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter and please donate whatever you can afford. And if you can't afford, that's absolutely fine. Please keep sharing our content because we rely on you to be our PR system on social media. So once again, thank you. And thank you again to Maureen. And it's been once again a pleasure. And we will be back tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. And I'll be back next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Thank you and goodbye.